Our next speaker will be Lesia Smyrna, who is head of the Department of International Academic Relations of the National Academy of Arts of Ukraine. She is Doctor of Art Studies and Senior Researcher. The topic of her presentation is Visualizing the Catastrophe, Russian-Ukrainian War and Arts.
Леся Смирна, начальник відділу міжнародних наукових зв'язків Національної академії мистецтв України, доктор мистецтвознавства, старший науковий співробітник. Тема виступу – візуалізація катастрофи, російсько-українська війна та мистецтво. Просимо.
Thank you very much for giving me a floor. I just need a few minutes to share with you my presentation. Maybe I switch off. Everything is okay with presentation? Okay, thank you very much, dear colleagues. It is indeed an honor for me to join this event and be a part of the conference. And now I would like to talk about how art can help us understand the complex relationships between migration, homelessness, war crimes, and the human experience of war. And taking as a starting point Kate McLaughlin's assertion that the process of representing war is akin to imposing discursive order on the chaos of conflict, I will also discuss on how artists in Ukraine use art as a way of structuring and making sense of the disorder of war, transforming vulnerability into a powerful form of testimony. First, let me say that a recent report from the United Nations organization confirms that over 14 million Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes since the invasion, and millions more are living as refugees outside of the country. This crisis is a stark reminder of philosopher Zygmunt Bauman warning that there is no shortcut solution to the current refugee problem. Humanity is in crisis, and there is no exit from that crisis other than the solidarity of humans. The sense of homelessness is not just a political issue, but an existential one that affects us all. And right now, Ukrainians are being forced to rebuild their sense of home and identity and to find ways to cope with trauma and losing of the previous life. Dispersed and dislocated Ukrainian artists visualize the pain of loss, including Katerina Lisovenko, whose own life has been marked by displacement, and much of her artistic practice is inextricably linked to the issue of migration, loss, and identity. In the Naked Room installation, Lisovenko gives us a glimpse into a dry, cool, unfriendly, dark room, a cold space of uncertainty and loss, where one briefly finds oneself in a state of dislocation, as it reveals both the universality of precarity and the inequality with which it is distributed in current global society. Besides, the Naked Room is a home of necessity, not a home of the heart, as Clara Ronderos says in her short story From Home to Home: Investigations on Dislocation, exploring her own experience of loss and displacement using a laconic, functional, and limited language. In this small, barely functioning room, the only elements that break the anonymity, a few family photos on the wall and the mega comfort of a blanket on the bed. A failed attempt to create one's own landscape of nostalgia to give character to a place without identity. Many Lisovenko works are dedicated to the precarious nature of contemporary global society and the reconstruction and transforming of the ever-changing concept of home. We are here in Austria. I don't feel anything stable and safe anymore. I think many who fled here from other wars or disasters also know that everything good and valuable is very fragile. It breaks like glass, and you find yourself in a world where everything is possible. Lisovenko does this in a way that resonates with feminist and cultural scholar Doreen Massey's insightful observation about place as meaningful, lived, holistic, and integrated as home. and space as external, abstract, and without its own trajectories. And now in my second part of the speech, a few words about material and immaterial witnessing and war. Materials can in fact bear witness is the epistemological basis of Susan Shapley's book, Material Witness, Media, Forest Things and Evidence. She highlights two components of the discourse of memory, witnessing and practice of witnessing. And her focus, however, is on the politics of visuality, and she is also interested in what she calls regimes of perceptibility that transform testimonies into public truths and inevitably into political messages. What is more, artists today are particularly interested in the construction of history and memory, and they focus on the possibility of deriving historical evidence from human testimony, oral or written, as well as from traces left on matter or in sonic patterns. For example, using material and immaterial elements as agentic narratives of testimony, Nikita Kadan provides a powerful counteraction to the destructive traces of war crimes. Day after day, Kadan's Instagram features the most important voice of the war and air raid siren. Chronologically sequenced photo from the visual diary reveal an attention to details and focus on the crime scenes. Kadan uses this kind of sonic weapon to create an atmosphere of fear and discomfort and to express wider scope of the threat. This scale of the threat can be described in the following way. The war has transcended mere political and military conflict to become a battleground for culture and identity, marked by Russian efforts to eradicate Ukrainian heritage, language in occupied territories. This assault on Ukrainian identity has transformed the conflict into a profound culture war and existential struggle for the Ukrainian people. The territories that Kadan defines throughout the effects of sonic intrusion light between the sounds that awaken productive consciousness and the duty of intervention and responsibility. Thus, in 2023, with the support in Flanders Fields Museum, Kadan creates the sonic installation Trevoga. Translated from the Ukrainian, it has a double semantic meaning, both as a natural feeling of fear of a threat and as a signal to warn the population of the danger of an air raid. The installation is made of chromium-plated iron and covered with translucent fabric, the epicenter of which is a symbolic nail pointing into the dome of the cathedral. It represents the mast Odysseus was tied to when the siren seduced him. More visceral than visual is the sound patterns of tense mezzo-soprano Lena Belkina and violinist Igor Zavgorodny, who mimic the terrifying, all-absorbing sound of an air raid siren vibrations on the edge of the danger. In the documentary Preemptive Listening, the voiceover says that a siren is not just a wake-up call that points to the possibility of escape. It is much more. Each siren is a tombstone to a past trauma. Using sound intrusion to synchronize space and time, Kadan makes very clear references to the militaristic narratives of the past, which in the receptive field of the Western viewer constantly updates the concept of war, catastrophe, and death. The installation was set up in St. Peter's Church in the Belgian town of Ypres, which in 1917 was at the bloody epicenter of the offensive operation on the Western front in West Flanders during the First World War, and was almost destroyed under 24 artillery fire. And one more word about project. He views historical events throughout the prism of mythology, as I mentioned, and the metrics of philosophical discourse. He exploits the mythological archetype of Odysseus' journey, the archetype of the hero who is struggling for his grounds and motherland, to explore a universal motive such as struggle for belonging, resilience, and the quest for homecoming, tapping into the timeless and universal narratives. For Kadan, a sense of becoming present in times means entering into experience without eventualizing it, but bringing it closer to the point of reaching a new level on sensitivity to suffering. Can this be improved throughout the practice of art? And more importantly, how can we be a witness to unspeakable pain, suffering, disorder, and chaos at the historical juncture? What is more, his sonic installations, their words relies on the epistemological factuality, as the work is based on the story of a war veteran experiencing phantom pains from losing limbs and the political confrontation over legalizing cannabis in Ukraine. We are witnessing a war that has caused an epidemic of pain and trauma among both soldiers and civilians, and Kadan's goal is to break the cycle of community silence that accompanies trauma and phantom pains. He argues that war serves as a staging point where discursive and narrative are generated by utilizing the rhetorical practice of war. So my next point, let me underline and stress on the fact that the new realities associated with the conquest ambitions of the Putin regime and have sparked nationwide resistance, with many Ukrainian artists calling for armed struggle. The world-famous opera singer Vasyl Slipak was killed by an enemy bullet near Debaltseva. The talented poet and photographer Maxim Krivtsov, codenamed Dali, who managed to publish in his lifetime a collective of poems eloquently entitled Poems from the Gap, fell victim to Rushists. The poets Yaroslava Chernoguz and Dmitro Lazutkin are in the battle zone, and their trench poems won this year highest state awards at the Taras Shevchenko National Prize of Ukraine. In one of his poems, Maxim Krivtsov recalls how as a young boy he collected scrap metal to earn a few cents. And today he has to collect the remains of his comrades in the plantations. People who look like a person, a part of a person. There is nothing so-called in the world. This tragic everyday life of the horrors of war creates a philosophy of ordinariness that humanity is not yet ready to comprehend, in the form of an absurd combination of life and death, the bitterness of loss as a triumph of victory. Moving quickly through the processed images of war already associated with the wartime global ordinary, we come across documentation of deeply personal observations of the everyday, removed from the structural violence of war. For example, in one of Krivtsov's shoots, we see combat boots fixed in the space of an empty reality. Here, war appears as an event not confined to the war zone. The tragic image of the lonely tired boots pierces through the routine of an ongoing war, creating an alternative visualization of catastrophe that is compelling because it is so unspectacular. Well, my next point, I will start from a literary scholar, Kate McLaughlin, who suggests that it is impossible to escape the mental and physical confinement of a bombed and mutilated place once you enter it there. Your consciousness will forever be trapped in the space where the war is taking place. War irrevocably affects the space on and within which it occurs. Addressing the critical issue of environmental trauma and terrorism is paramount in shaping contemporary visual practice to what McLaughlin refers to as topographical consciousness. This approach aligns artists more closely with the land and specific locals. The Silent Book project by Italian-based artist Irina Ozarinska, whose structure unfolds on three semantic planes, Babyn Yar, Bucha, and Borodyanka, with their victims' continuity and archiving of continuity. In the Silent Book project, land is figured as a text of war and a silent witness becoming a material and an instrument of memory of war crimes and tragedies caused by totalitarian occupying regimes. And the artist literally paints with earth brought from the disaster sites in the region, in the Kiev region. literally grounded visuality reveals the theme of collective pain from the total evil of communism, Nazism, and Russianism, and it is a reminder that unpunished local evil leads to global evil. It is a view of criminal regimes through the prism of universal values and compassion for every victim, no matter how long ago the crime was committed. For example, photographer Yana Kononova has conducted her research in southern Ukraine last year to document how the explosion of the Kakhovska hydroelectric power station changed the local landscape, taking one piece of land from people and giving another in return. She started working on the digital photography Desperation series dedicated to the environmental disaster in southern Ukraine after the occupation of the Kherson region from the Russian troops. The main motive of her works was to document the complex relationship that creates a state of existential tension between peaceful existence and fear of the reality of a new catastrophe. In Kononova's war photographs, there are ordinary black and white subjects of the landscapes of Nikopol, Kherson, Zaporizhia, a coastline inhabited by abandoned ships, an industrial landscape with Dnipro structures, bridge arches, and a rocky island on the Dnipro Khortytsa. Semantic contrast between the disaster and the ordinariness become important for the recreation of the local landscape as a geological chronicle of unexplored man-made disasters that go in cycle, returning only by changing their configurations. Looking at them, you can travel deep into history, observe how the symbol of Soviet industrialization are superimposed on the consequences of a major disaster, the destruction of the Kakhovska Dam. And finally, dear colleagues, I would like to underline that the Ukrainian artist's exploration of the relationship between memory and the present as projected onto the scat topography finds a fascinating echo in Karen Barrett's concept of time as a symbolic clock. For this artist, the imperative to shake and synchronize this clock is crucial as they seek to create a collective understanding of the past, present, that is embedded in their bodies and the land. By juxtaposing disparate historical markers, 1942, 1945, and 2022, they disrupt the traditional notion of a linear timeline, instead revealing a complex scope of interconnected moments. As Barrett suggests, the 20th century is far from being past, and the tragic events of Ukraine's recent history serve as a stark reminder of this. Thus, the convergence of this marker on a single clock, a single moment of a space-time paradigm underscore the urgency of this artist's inquiry to reconcile the fragmented narratives of the past with the unsettled present. Thank you for your attention. I have tried to be concise and cut my long story short, so sorry it was too long anyway. Thank you. And one more sorry, because I'm afraid I have to say goodbye because I'm attending another conference at the same time, and but I will be joined for a further discussion a little bit later on, and I hope you have a great time, and I will catch up with you soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah.